Color Quest friends, I am here to say I made a mistake. So easy to do, right? This is Margaret Byrd, and thanks for joining me here at Color Quest. Today, I need to right a wrong. Last week's video on Sappanwood, I worked with various ways to shift colors, one of which is through the percentage of the dye matter. And I calculated it wrong. Very silly mistake, very easy mistake though, because when we're dealing with the weight of fiber and percentages, it can get kind of confusing. So I want to thank one of our viewers here for asking me after watching this video and saying, I'm confused. I don't think that was 100%. She was absolutely right. So join me today on Color Quest as we take a quick peek, and I'm talking quick, look at the weight of fiber and what that really means, and hopefully how to accurately calculate percentages based upon it. Go get your scale and your calculator. You're gonna need them.
And then the other 4 pieces, I'm actually first going to do all of these in 100% weight of fiber for the sawdust, the Sappanwood sawdust.
So we're all busy folk, correct? And if you're like me, you probably do a lot of multitasking. As a YouTube content creator, I am constantly filming and creating videos to be able to upload every Friday. And that can actually be a pretty daunting task. Now, I'm not complaining, I actually love it. I find it to be not only rewarding because of the connection I'm making here with you, but also because it's quite creative. And with a background in photography, filmmaking kind of feels like it's right up my alley. Also, I love natural color, and I love bringing you along on my journey to discover how to bring natural color into my own art practice. So having said all of that, last week was a wild week. So 2022 is the year that I'm describing as a professional development year, and that is because different workshops and travel that I had scheduled throughout 20 and 21 were canceled for obvious reasons. And so everything's happening this year. And last week I was getting ready to set off to a workshop, and I absolutely was scrambling to get the Sappanwood video done. So in that mix, I also am trying to batch film. It's probably more information than you really care to know, but in doing that, I was looking at filming all of July's content. Well, guess what? It's been confusing. And I think that translated into last week's video, not to mention the doorbell.
The Sappanwood sawdust.
So, needless to say, weight of fiber. Let's talk about it. So, an incredibly important term that you're gonna see flying all over the place is W.O.F, or as it stands for, weight of fiber. So you'll see this in all kinds of recipes when you're doing natural dyeing or dyeing in general, that you need to look at the W.O.F. And that is because lots of things are dependent on the weight of the fiber that you're dyeing. So having that information is going to help you determine the amount of dye material or mordants that you are going to need in order to properly, or let's say successfully, dye the fiber that you want. And since I may be dyeing a t-shirt and you may be dyeing napkins, or someone else may be dyeing socks, all of those things have different weights. And like cooking, a recipe is helpful, but it is highly dependent on what you are actually dyeing. So many factors go into this. It also depends on what kind of material you're dyeing. But that's a whole nother, I don't know, a couple of days of videos. So let's stick to weight of fiber. In order to accurately use materials like modifiers, mordants, and even dye matter, it is useful for you to know the weight of what you're dyeing, i.e. W.O.F. So let's go back to last week's video where I was trying to calculate the weight of fiber for what I was dyeing. I'm going to show you that process again based upon what I was thinking about last week. And then in this video, we're going to recalculate for 100% Sappanwood based upon the weight of fiber that I'm going to dye today. I'm not going to dye big pieces, so the numbers will be different, but let's go back in time and look at what I should have done for 100% Sappanwood last week versus what I actually did, and then let's try again. So I recommend that you always add to your dye studio a scale and have a calculator handy, because both of these are going to be your friend. Now, this is the fiber that I was dyeing last week, these wonderful pieces of cotton. And I had 5 pieces, and my intention was to dye one piece in a 20% weight of fiber for Sappanwood, which I did correctly. You can go back and watch that in the video, yay. And then I wanted to dye 4 pieces in 100%, which meant that for this calculation, the weight of the fiber is 56. Again, my scale will alter between 55 and 56, but we know that that's how much this weighs, and this is all in grams. It's just easier to do it this way. So I have 55 grams of fiber that I want to dye at 100%. Now the math is pretty easy on that, but last week I did it and I winged it and I missed it by a whole decimal point. So it just went down to 54. Not a very accurate scale, but that's okay. Let's do 55. So my fiber weighs, the weight of fiber, 55 grams, right? And I want to have 100% of the weight of fiber for Sappanwood. So very simple. I'm going to multiply it times 100%. And guess what? I should use 55 grams of Sappanwood. Now, this is a 1-to-1 ratio, right? That should have been super easy for me, and I don't know, I messed that up. So you can do this for anything. So if I wanted to only dye these, for example, in a 20% weight of fiber for Sappanwood, I would just do the same. Down to 53. 55 times 20%. And then I would know that I would need 11 grams of Sappanwood. So there is a misconception, and it's an easy one to make, that the strength of dye has to do with how much water you have in your dye bath as compared to your dye matter. That's logical. But with natural dyeing, the amount of dye matter that's needed is connected to the amount of fiber. And there's only so much dye that's going to stick to a piece of fiber, which is why we weigh the fiber, so we know that we have enough dye in order for it to properly stick to the fiber. So if I have 100 grams and I have a dye matter that is 100% weight of fiber, I'll put in 100 grams of the dye matter as well. And that will allow me to get a certain strength of color onto that fiber. Now, you can continue to use that dye in what we call an exhaust bath or an exhaust state. And just there's less and less dye molecules in that dye because you've taken them out and attached them to the fiber. And so your dye will become weaker and weaker. And eventually, there'll be no dye molecules left to attach to your fiber. So the weight of fiber allows you to feel confident that you're going to have the proper percentages of your dye matter to get the best shot of a certain color on your fiber. Now, I like to play around with strengths. I like to play around with exhaust baths. I'm not as concerned about achieving a particular color. And I believe in natural dyeing, that's a wonderful thing. However, there are reasons and personal choices for people that want to have a very specific result, and that's okay. So following the weight of fiber calculations and percentages connected to your dye matter is going to make you happier with the results you get in your dye. So it's not about the volume of water. It is about the percentage between the dye matter and the weight of fiber. Even filming this, it's very confusing. It's like I understand it, but trying to say it in a clear and concise way, it's kind of tough. So hopefully I'm not confusing the matter more. So here's the plan. I'm going to try to recreate, using 100% Sappanwood, what I did last week in terms of the colors that I achieved. Not going to take you through step by step. You can go back and watch that video and we'll do a little comparison. But in order to do that, I'm going to take a piece of fiber, just one. I'm going to be ripping this up so that I can make the various colors, the different acidic and alkaline shifts that I did, and see if instead of working with a 10% dye matter to the weight of fabric, like I did last week, I'm actually going to follow what I intended to do, and that is to dye 100% Sappanwood, and then we will see how those different alkaline and acidic shifts and iron shifts would be different. I was surprised at how light some of my colors were last week. I thought it had exclusively to do with the amount of modifiers I was using and if I had disturbed the integrity of the dye, but I think it's because I was at 10% and not 100%. So let's test it out and see. Okay, flashback to last week. Here's my one piece of fiber that I want to be at 100% in terms of the Sappanwood. So I'm gonna weigh the fiber. It's 14 grams. I'm gonna just do it on the calculator. 14 times 100% means I need 14 grams of Sappanwood. Let's measure it. Here we go. Sappanwood. 14 grams. Into the pot you go. So this has been soaking the Sappanwood for about an hour, just to loosen it up. And just kind of curious. Yeah. Now this is without any heat. Now I'm going to heat it like I normally do. We'll see what color we get. And while that heats up, got my fiber soaking. Always want to introduce wet fiber into any dye pot. Okay, this has been soaking for about an hour in the 100%. Does it look different? I don't know. I'm going to rinse this out and hang it to dry, and then we can compare it. Something to keep in mind is that fiber, when it's wet, is darker than when it dries. And so I was reminded recently that we should never make decisions while fiber is wet, but to look at it after it dries. You may decide
that you like something better when it dries, or you may then determine that you need to do something else to that fiber. So don't make decisions with wet fiber is the lesson here. And remember that typically fiber will dry up to 3 shades lighter. So just take the time to allow that air to do its magic. And then we will look at this sample next to last week's sample and see if there's a big difference between 100% and the 10% I did last week. Well, that was fun. I've now shifted acidic and alkaline in 2 different ways, as well as tested an iron shift with the true 100% Sappanwood in a ratio to the weight of fiber. And it was definitely different. So I'd like to show you the results, and you can see that yet again, more colors to be had. Probably, honestly, the least different was the 100% as compared to what I thought was 100% last week. It's darker, but not by a ton. But where it really starts to make a difference is with all the shifting that I did. So for example, this is the calcium carbonate shift that was done last week with what ended up being about a 10%, not 100. And this was with the true 100. So you can see that's quite a difference. Then if we move over to, actually, let's look at this one. This one I didn't really understand why it was so light. This is with soda ash, and this is with soda ash with the 100%. So huge difference. You can really see it in this one. And as well as this one. Now this was with lemon juice, the acidic shift. It was almost like a yellow. And here it retained a lot more of its pinkish color, but it is more orange, which is kind of hard to see in this, especially when compared to this. And then the iron shift was definitely darker. So you can see the iron shift here from last week's versus this week's. So the palette definitely widened. You can see how measuring the weight of fiber and doing a difference in terms of the percentages of the dye matter to match either lower or the same, like a 1-to-1 ratio, 100%, 100%, versus like 20% and so forth, it makes a huge difference. So if you really want to achieve a certain color, or at least a color realm, make sure that you are weighing your fiber and dye matter accordingly. So lessons learned. 1, definitely weighing things are going to allow you to potentially make educated adjustments. And if you're looking to add certain percentages of any of the dye matter, the modifiers, the mordants, knowing your weight and the percentages against the weight of fiber allows you to be able to follow recipes and maybe have a little bit more control in your dye studio. The other thing is it really shows you how varied natural dye can be based upon so many factors. So while we made 6 colors last week, we really made an additional 5 colors this week, all in the name of a math problem. So thank you again to the Color Quest viewer here that recognized the mistake from last week in my math and giving me an opportunity to address just exactly what W.O.F means and how to use it correctly in your dye practice. So back to the regularly scheduled programming. Have a great couple days, and I will see you on Friday. You're doing natural dyeing or dyeing in general, that you need to look at the W.O.F. I don't know if that's how, that you need to look at the W.O.F.